Happy holidays, everyone. I'm Firewalker, and this year I am celebrating my very first holiday season after having completely and truly left religion as a whole. Even though there are 38, if not more, different festivals and celebrations going on this time of year, I'm still focusing almost all of my attention on Christmas and Christianity because, well, I realized the other week that I passed 12 churches on my way to work every morning. My fiance and I passed 19 churches on our way to dinner last week, and only one of them is a non-Christian institution, when that would be actually Baha'i, which is still Abrahamic. So I'm pretty heavily surrounded by Christianity and Christmas as a whole. Also, I was brought up believing that there was a war on Christmas and was pretty heavy in the keep Christ in Christmas nonsense. So it's really interesting for me to have that sort of background and be still in such an environment, and then be able to look at alternate texts regarding the birth of Jesus and whether or not it was actually a virgin birth. I've also had the opportunity to learn about and explore the idea that the virgin birth was not original to Christianity, nor is Jesus' supposed virgin birth unique. For some reason, though, it is extremely important to Christians that Jesus and Christianity is unique. And with that, growing up with that idea in my head, it's kind of enlightening and eye-opening to look at some of the other virgin birth stories. But before we get into the other stories, I would hate to take the Christ out of Christmas, so I guess we'll begin with different stories about Jesus' birth, shall we? Bart Ehrman compiled a very interesting book called The Lost Scriptures, and it's on books that did not make it into the New Testament. And in here we find the Proto-Gospel of James in circulation approximately 150 CE, Common Era, or AD if you prefer. And apparently, he reports at least, that this was a very popular book into the medieval era, which I thought very interesting how much Christianity has changed since its inception. In any case, this story has the virgin birth of Jesus. But that's not what's interesting. What's interesting is its defense or explanation of how they know it was a virgin birth. For instance, a priest calls before him Joseph and Mary and says, "Here, drink this holy water and then go out into the wilderness for X amount of time. And if you come back alive, we'll know there's no sin within you and you haven't, created a baby before marriage." Joseph goes out, comes back alive. Okay, so clearly he's not the father. He is without sin. Then they give it to Mary. She goes out and she comes back alive. Therefore, she didn't cheat on Joseph. She didn't have premarital sex. It is a virgin birth. And then as they're traveling, I believe it's still because of the census, Mary gives birth in a cave. And Joseph was able to go out and get a midwife. So then after she gives birth, the midwife does a postpartum inspection to determine whether or not Mary was a virgin. I don't understand how exactly that is supposed to work. I don't think there's going to be any evidence of whether or not Mary was a virgin at the time of Jesus' conception or after even. Pretty sure all of that was going to be pretty much utterly destroyed by the process of, giving birth. So that's an interesting alternate text. And if that were true, if we were really going to fight on the historicity of Jesus and, trying to prove the uniqueness of Christianity, then this is something that we have to take into consideration. Is that how exactly would you know it's a virgin birth? Because these techniques that are reported in this particular gospel, I guess, aren't going to get you very far. Of course, that's really the least of their concerns, especially when you take into consideration the writings of Celsus, who Christians like to cite as a source proving the historicity of Jesus, but they tend to ignore all the rest of the stuff he says about Christianity, for instance. And this we have from Orion's, that's how I'm going to pronounce it anyways, Orion's response to Celsus. We don't have the writings of Celsus anymore. But anyways, it says, and I'm going to quote from this, Celsus's view of Christians and Christianity. We have, Celsus accuses Jesus of having invented his birth from a virgin, and upbraids him with being born in a certain Jewish village of a poor woman of the country, who gained her subsistence by spinning, and who was turned out of doors by her husband, a carpenter by trade, because she was convicted of adultery. That after being driven away by her husband and wandering about for a time, she disgracefully gave birth to Jesus, an illegitimate child, who, having hired himself out as a servant in Egypt on account of his poverty, and having there acquired some miraculous powers, on which the Egyptians greatly pride themselves, returned to his own country, highly elated on account of them, and by means of these proclaimed himself a god. And let's see, Orion would have been Celsus would have been writing in about 115 CE is the current estimate, I do believe. Actually, if we take a look at Dr. Richard Carrier's book on the historicity of Jesus, Why We Might Have Reason to Doubt, on page 281 through about 283, we see him talking about a 4th century Christian scholar called Epiphanius. That's what I'm going to say. It's my story and I'm sticking to it. In any case, Epiphanius was compiling a book on all of the heresies he knew of at the time, and this included a group called the Nazareans, who believed that Jesus Christ was born in, 103 BCE and died in 76 BCE. So we're talking 100 years before what the canon typically depicts. And these Christians believe that he was born and that he died under the reign of Alexander Jannaeus. Again, that's how I'm going to pronounce it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Carrier also mentions that the Babylonian Talmud confirms that such a group existed. In fact, he argues that the Christians, that the Jews who compiled it, didn't even know of any other sect of Christianity. And in this Talmud, we see a picture of Jesus ben Pariah and Jesus the Nazarene escaping to Alexandria, Egypt, when King Jannaeus was killing our rabbis. And the story actually seems to mirror, or is very similar at least, to the nativity story when Herod's killing all the baby boys and Mary, Joseph, and Jesus flee to Egypt. The Jesus, who is identified as Jesus the Nazarene, was condemned for immorality, sorcery, and worshipping idols, and eventually executed because he practiced magic and led Israel astray. This Jesus is also known as Ben Stada, meaning son of the unfaithful. A woman named Mary committed adultery with her lover Pandera, most likely a Roman soldier, gave birth to Ben Stada, who is also known as Ben Pandera, which may have been a pun on Ben Parthenos, son of a virgin. Although in this account, Ben Stada was executed in Lydda, not Jerusalem. So here's another pretty early story, actually way early, predating the canon, story of a Jesus who was born not of a virgin, but of a woman who was convicted of adultery. I wish Christians good luck explaining away that one. Now that we've paid our due diligence to Christmas, we can move on to talk about some of the other virgin births in history. For instance, we have Horus of Egypt, we have Attis, Zoroaster, Dionysus, Romulus, who is supposedly the founder of Rome. And actually, there are a surprising number of parallels between Romulus and Jesus, but that's a story for another time. We also have Krishna. And of course, and I have had someone argue this with me, there are multiple accounts of these people, these deities' births. Because wouldn't you know it, it's pretty easy to have multiple stories about somebody who doesn't exist. So that doesn't really faze me, although I am certain that there are stories of these people being born of virgin births, and I will, of course, link all of the sources in the description below. And this is why, or one of the reasons why, I have such an issue with Christians claiming that Christianity is somehow unique. Like, even the supposed birth of your Savior, which would be arguably the beginning of the story, for Christianity at least over Judaism, even that isn't original. In fact, it's an archetype of literature of this time to have some sort of miracle occur during this person's birth or conception that indicated that this person was going to be somebody great, somebody important, something that set them apart from everybody else. That's just what they did. It was a normal part of literature. It is a normal part of mythology to have such a birth story. So much so that even the virgin birth isn't original. Of course, we can't even say that virgin births, or at least accounts of virgin births, are something simply of the olden days. A study published in the British Medical Journal reports that 1 in 200 women report virgin pregnancies. Still. This was commented on in the LA Times, the National, and the Independent. 1 in 200 still today. And this might have actually just been a study of U.S. American pregnancies. But either way, 1 in 200, 0.5% say that they did not have sex in order to get pregnant. And I'm not going to science this. I don't enjoy sciencing per se. And I think there's a lot of really intelligent people who would science this account of a virgin birth and talk about why this isn't possible, at least not to have a baby boy and have a virgin birth. But that's not the issue that I have per se. And so Christians talking about the uniqueness of Christianity and how the miracle of Jesus' birth would point to there being some truth behind it somehow, would need to answer this for me. Why is it then that we have so many virgin births? Is it that it's easier to claim that than it is to be honest about cheating, about premarital sex? Or does your God just hand out virgin births on a pretty regular daily basis? Or is there another deity involved? That's an important question. This is 1 in 200 during an age where we can do paternity tests. We can figure out who the father of the baby actually is. Now imagine a time when we couldn't do that. When maybe the only way we could tell whether somebody was a virgin still or not was to give them holy water and send them out into the wilderness, and to come back alive, then God wasn't judging them and therefore they were sinless. Imagine a time without DNA tests, say, I don't know, approximately 2,000 years ago. It's just an interesting thought. Even then, even if Christians were able to prove the existence of some historical Jesus figure, they'd have a much harder time proving that he was who we say he said he was. And with that in mind, though, I wish you guys a happy holiday. And I would be interested in hearing how everybody else celebrates the holiday season, especially since I now have the freedom to explore so many different celebrations and means of celebrating that I've never had before.